Awesome. Hello, everyone. Today is February 14th, 2022. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF certified meeting, so let's be nice to everyone and have a good day. I added some small stuff to the agenda. Raul, I see you're here. I don't know if you wanted to just maybe have kind of any idea bouncing before continuing the conversation with SIG Network this Thursday, or maybe give kind of a brief summary of how that went 2 weeks ago, I guess now.
Yeah, that sounds good. So the long story short is we presented a rough deck, which was basically just transcribing the working doc that we've had going for a couple of weeks now. We presented it to SIG Network, and I think the broad strokes were people were generally supportive of an FQDN API in tree or as a part of the OSS specification. There was some concerns about what the wildcard specifier would do, but generally speaking, the API seemed fine. I think where there were a lot of pretty valid concerns were around integrating FQDN into the existing network policy API, specifically the sort of V1 API. And I think Bowie and Tim and Dan made a few good points, especially about conformance. Basically, today there is no proper conformance for network policy. We have a bunch of features in network policy, and we don't make a good effort to define what features are optional or what features are required, and we don't have test grids that enforce that or anything of that nature. And so, especially when you add something like this pattern match, which ostensibly some CNI providers could, decide not to implement because it's a lot harder than doing an exact match. We need a good story around, all right, how do we indicate that this is optional, and how do we, measure conformance when an API has these optional fields. This is a long way of saying that their suggestion was maybe we should build out a new API object for FQDN, and there wasn't any strong push that new object be like a netpol v2. I think they were pretty open-ended of, do whatever makes sense, but it might be better to create a new object where we can be very precise about what is required for an implementer to implement, what is optional, and then write good testing and just conformance requirements around that. And I mean, I updated the FQDN doc a little bit. I think, and I didn't finish all my thoughts. I'll try to go do that before the next SIG Network meeting. But basically, I tried to capture this idea of conformance. I didn't get around to doing that all the way. What I did was I added a status section here. This was just sort of off the top of my head, sketching out some idea of if we added a new object, what would the status look like? I can share my screen really quickly if that's.
Yeah, okay. Let me make you a co-host.
Yeah.
Okay, you're all set.
All right. Let me share.
We can see you, but we can't hear you if you're trying to talk.
All right, how about now?
There you go.
Okay, cool. My bad. What I was saying was, I think Tim was mentioning that because of the all ports feature, I believe, which is in beta right now in Network Policy V1, there's some concern around CNIs not supporting it, and so they were thinking of adding a status field to Network Policy itself, and so maybe we'll want to keep track of how they're doing that and sync up here. But what I've done is I, took heavy inspiration from the old status cap and basically sketched out an idea of, all right, if we wanted to have some sort of conformance indicator as part of this FQDN API, what would that look like? And so I have this status with a bunch of conditions that you can set, namely enforcing to say that, yes, I am trying to enforce a particular feature, or, oh, actually, the status kep is merged, if that's what that is.
Yeah, and Ricardo's here, who owned that kep, and I think it kind of got swung in out of left field last second, but I'm glad it's in at least. So
Well,
we might be able to build off that.
Yeah, I guess I need to read up on this kep. I haven't been quite current, but I think the idea would be that since there is a status in network policy, we can potentially explore what adding FQDN would look like in V1 and whether we can leverage the status capabilities to cleanly implement that in. But the approach that will probably get us quick traction in SIG network is to say, okay, why don't we create a brand new API object, call it, FQDN policy or whatever, and have similar status type behavior to indicate conformance across, especially the pattern match field.
I don't think. I mean, sort of with the string, with the star there. I mean, you cannot even do, like I said last time, you cannot do ls on most DNSs. You can never get all the names it will match against beforehand. So you cannot make the query to get the address.
That's right.
I mean, if you cannot do ls on the domain, right? How will you know the names that you're supposed to match to and the addresses?
Per, let me suggest something before we jump into the technical details.
Sure.
I think that right now, what we should do, because from my perspective on the end port, right, and all of the other caps that I've been dealing, and also Andrew has been dealing, right? So if we decide right now, and I agree with you that we need to have some concerns on the technical implementation side. I just don't think that right now is the right timing to do that, right? So we can come and say, hey, so this is the API design, this is the way that we think that it should work. And then jumping into the CNI implementations, we need to discuss with them if they want to do that or not. And by my experience, as an example, so let's say Cilium, right? So Cilium, they do have their own way of implementing this, which is, as an example, intercepting via eBPF the query for DNS, right? So this is, I don't know if this is the way that they do that, but this is like a way that probably it's possible. And the same thing for, like, let's say Antria, we can, as an example, I don't speak for Antria, Jan does, but I'm just giving an example. Okay, so in Antria, we can give an intercept. So the implementation side for the CNI right now, in my opinion, we should not discuss about that, right? I think that by that cap and by that proposal, what we need to discuss is, okay, first of all, does it make sense?
But you assume that there is a DNS lookup.
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't.
It's like you're excluding the whole range of protocols.
No, but
access, right?
Think. Okay, so I just don't want to discuss right now.
Sure.
What's the implementation? What's the implementation caveat on that, right? So what the CNIs are? I mean, I think that right now what we need to do is, hey, CNIs, we do have this proposal, right? So yeah, does this make sense for Antria to implement? KZ, does this make sense to Calico to implement? If not, should we start implementing this as Jay always bring as a controller? Otherwise, I think that like Rahul, as an example, I think he worked for Google, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So you probably does have a user story to bring this to us, like a user need for that, and probably Google does or does not have a way of implementing that. So I wouldn't, in my perspective, probably I am wrong. Usually I am, but I wouldn't spend too many time right now discussing about the implementation caveat on that, because we know that.
I tend to agree. I totally tend to agree, Ricardo. And I think you know, the main thing is like, is this implementable or not? And like Per, you might not, I think you with this wildcard thing explicitly, you don't think it is, and you have really valid reasons for that. And I also think some other people might say it isn't or is, vice versa. I think at the end of the day, like if the user stories align, the needs are there, let's decide on the API. Let's go to V1. If it's impossible to implement, we're going to roll the thing. We're going to remove wildcard matching in V2.
No, we
you know what I mean?
API discussion. Absolutely. That is fine.
I think like that was a takeaway for me. I don't know if Rahul, you agree. Like we spent a lot of time in Sig Network talking about the implementation. Like it seems right away people were like, oh yeah, we need this. Like a lot of implementations and distros already have some sort of DNS matching. The biggest thing that we got hung up on in that meeting, which was funny, was the wildcard matching. And it was a conversation of, is this possible or not? Right?
I was also Red Hat explaining how they've done it and why they thought it was a very bad idea, right?
Yeah,
so if we're talking about introducing parts in this that is sort of mandatory and parts that are optional, and sort of have a I guess a vector that describes the capabilities of a particular system. So that's always a problem, because this needs to be treated as a standard, right? I mean, you're standardizing a behavior, and when you do that, so part of it is then to describe sort of what is user defined as sort of, you always end up in that. You can implement almost everything somewhere in some way, but that doesn't mean that you can implement it everywhere.
But yeah, I agree with you. And this is why I think that right now, we shouldn't, because we don't have everyone's opinion here right now. We don't know how Google, as an example, if they don't use Cilium, if they're going to be able to implement that over their Borg thing. I don't know. I'm just throwing random words, right? I don't know if like for Antria. So this is how actually the proposal of the graduation works, right? So we
sort of in that case, sort of what the capabilities a conforming implementation must, that is mandated that it must handle, and what is optionally. And then sort of you fill in, when you have your implementation, you say with capabilities that is fulfilled by a particular implementation. And sort of then you can have all sort of things that can be added in, right? That's sort of a slippery slope, depending on if you're trying to, I don't think that's so much a problem here. If you're trying to make portable code, right, you're scared of these options.
So my proposal right now is that instead of just, because I am, as an example, I am really this is a cap of something that we've been discussing since when we started this group, right? So and every time someone comes with a proposal, and that proposal never moves forward, or just gets like a stop from Sig Network saying, okay, we are not going to do that. So right now,
as long as it's clear that
my point here right now is, let's allow Rahul to present the whole situation, and maybe we should start just commenting all of the implementation caveats, and then cycle back again to the cap review.
That's good.
Okay, because I'm not saying that we shouldn't discuss this right now. I'm just saying that probably I wanna see the whole proposal. I just don't want to stop on like the wildcard thing.
And I think the answer to my question is like, some parts can be optional. End of discussion for what.
Sure. So my ask for that is like, Rahul, can you please share? I don't know if this is shared. So can you please share this document with the whole group?
It is. If you go and look at in the minutes, it's there.
Yeah. So put your comments on there, Per, and probably on the next meeting we can, because we still need to work on something in this group, right? So in the next meeting we can discuss about like the questions over every comment. I still need to add that, so we can at least we can have the whole picture right now. Probably I will take some notes on that as well.
Discuss the machinery of
okay.
I mean, the API machinery and how to include a thing that it. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So Rahul, if you wanna move forward with that, I don't know if you already presented that. I'm just jumping in, just jumping in because of the network policy status stuff. I wanted to give you some status over the network policy status, but go ahead. I forgot to add into the agenda as well. So Andrew, you can just curse me and ask me to come back another week doing that. But right now,
no, you're always welcome. You're always welcome.
No,
Go ahead,
no worries.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a fantastic point. The optional matchers is something that we really do want to make as a core part of the API that we're designing. And so I encourage you to read through what I've sketched out for this status and conformance section here. I need to do my homework as well. I need to go read the network policy status stuff, understand and internalize that, and then flesh out this example a little bit more. This was just hacked together and slapped on as a last minute addendum. But ideally, what I'd like to do is flesh this out before Thursday. And I think we have a little bit of time in SIG Network where we can come back and present this again. There's also a section on expected behavior, which starts to get a little bit into the nitty gritty of, how should this policy behave? How should it be enforced and stuff like that? We don't necessarily need to get into it right now, but if you have thoughts or ideas about that, this might be a good place to just comment, add in new line items, and we can get to it maybe a little bit after the API discussion is at a more stable point, I guess.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job on, let me just say that, in SIG Network last time. Like, it's hard to keep that group corralled, and I think we had a pretty constructive conversation, and the general gist was like, we like this, we don't like the implementation, right? So
right.
Let's, like Ricardo said, let's focus on the API, making it as best as we can to solve the use cases right now. And then like, maybe we will circle back and take some time and even look at, I know Google has an implementation they've upstreamed already, maybe augmenting that and seeing if it's possible even for us as a group to implement, right? And there's different ways there.
I just could add sort of caveat things that can be problematic. I mean, something as simple as FTP, right? Or no, most RSTP stuff, they send a URL actually nowadays with the name in instead of just addresses. And same thing with zip. Because that's all of my scare when I see something like that you do a request and get the data structure back that contains addresses and not names, that they're not looked up. You want the comments already by Thursday, right? That's what he says. You can present again on Thursday. So I'll try to get some time tomorrow to go through.
That'd be awesome. And circling back to conformance, so this kind of goes in line with expected behavior. A lot of this is done with Cyclonus, and I keep raving about it. I'm working to try to bring that kind of in tree in our repo. And we could literally build in FQDN policy conformance testing within Cyclonus. Like, it's just an extension of it.
It's a nice piece of software that just sits and almost gets forgotten.
Right, exactly. So I'd love for us to be able to hold, the CRD definitions and API definitions for these objects we're proposing, especially if they're going to be implemented as CRDs. And I'd also love to hold the tools that help us, verify what features are supported, what features are not against various implementations. And Cyclonus already does a lot of that infrastructure. So I think it fits right in here. That's a little bit down the road, but I don't even know if you want to mention that here, in SIG Network yet, but something to look forward to.
Yeah, just a question to Rahul. So the whole idea would then is, I assume, to give persons that are not network experts sort of a way to try to express what they should be able to talk to, because they're just used to use DNS names, right? I mean, or names they don't really know about v4 and v6 and all this stuff. Is that's really the purpose here, to open up for them, or is it more to be able to take wider domains without having to try to figure out which addresses are used. Just curious. Sort of. So most people has no freaking clue what an IP address is anymore. They know what the URL is, but not the IP addresses.
So it's a question on the reason why we need the set.
Yes, sort of the attended use sort of for the users. That's really just curious.
I would actually imagine this to be used by anyone who actually write IP block, sort of like network policies. I'm not speaking for any particular persona, for example, the developers or admins or whatnot. I don't actually have any. I don't know of any use cases that I have already heard of from customers who actually use IP blocks in network policies. But I would imagine that if they actually use IP blocks to sort of like restrict traffic from out of the cluster, that will be a really pain to use, because for specific FQDNs or specific services, chances are there are IP addresses that are ephemeral, just like pod IPs, and you will have to sort of like keep up to date on that, rather than
I haven't started looking really seriously on the multi-cluster rules yet, but I mean that must be even same problem, right? You have two clusters. People are not supposed to know about the underlying IPs, and you want to say what can talk to what. Can you talk about the objects inside there, or do you need to use the DNS for it? But,
can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. I had to drop off. I apologize. I missed a bit of the middle discussion. But if the question was around who the target personas are,
exactly, and sort of what is the sort of use case?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a couple of user stories at the top, but I mean, just to talk through who those folks are. Basically, the request was that you can use IP blocks, and the people who want to use this are conceptually okay with using IP blocks to allow and reject traffic. The concern is mainly around supportability of that behavior. Like, for one, it's a little bit tricky to look at an IP block and understand what this particular rule is doing. It's easier just from a use perspective to look at a FQDN and say, okay, I understand what this rule is trying to achieve. So that's one reason that we've had this request. And the other one was to Yang's point about ephemeral IPs or rotating IPs and things like that. They don't want to keep track of a changing record. They want to be able to just point you to an FQDN and say, okay, go figure this out. Just because you brought it up, the multi-cluster thing is a really good point. And I have a to-do in the expected behavior about how we want to handle in-cluster services and those DNS records. That's a very open point, and I think we'll have to dial in on that, in future iterations. But yeah, I think it's very much still open about how we handle in-cluster services and also services exported from a multi-cluster scenario or something like that.
To that point, Rahul, I was looking at the screen you just shared, and I was reading up on something that is a little bit confusing to me, because it actually said that something in the lines of keep in mind that the FQDN policies itself can actually affect DNS lookups. I'm not entirely sure that I understand this.
Yeah. So this was an interesting thing that I was thinking about, and basically the point I was trying to make was, if I write, and the way we're defining the API today is that FQDNs and network policies are additive, and you basically take the set of all of them together, and that defines the allow list, right? So if let's assume I had a workload and I just applied an FQDN policy to it. I said, you're allowed to egress to wikipedia.org. In that scenario, I've implicitly denied you from accessing kubedns, as an example. And so sure, you can talk to wikipedia.org, but you can't even do the DNS resolution for wikipedia.org. The network policy implicitly denies you from that. And so that's I don't know what we want to do about that. In some sense, it's semantically clean to say that's working as intended.
Why would it forbid you to ask the question?
Yeah, it's because the network policy v1 as of now is the loudest model, which means that anything, if you specify an egress rule at all, anything allowed egress-wise will be the thing that you have written out explicitly. Okay. So when you specify you wanted to egress to wikipedia.org, implicitly that means that egress to kubedns or kubesystem. Which is really unfortunate.
That's what I was hoping you're saying. Not that it was the DNS server at Wikipedia you were talking about, but yes, we should have. I mean, that's that cluster policy rule that we want to have, right? That everyone is allowed always to talk to the API server and the DNS.
Right. So, I mean, I think the solution to this is use admin network policy, make sure everyone can do DNS lookups, and then your FQDNs will work cleanly. I don't think adding a carve out for DNS as part of the FQDN spec is a very clean way of going about that business.
I'm not too sure about that because in a cluster, even if we have the admin network policy cap in, right, in some sense it is not I don't think it is a good idea to always assume that there can be some sort of admin network policy in the cluster where admin can configure. Like if in a cluster there's actually no admins, for example, then a network policy with FQDN rules in the best case scenario should be working on its own, right? So in that case, it will be something like you specify an FQDN rule and another egress rule just to egress to the kubedns namespace, for example. But you cannot always sort of like assume there can be some admin network policies applied in the cluster because that's a different persona, and developers should be expected to self-service this rather than having to have some admin open DNS for them.
Actually, that raises an interesting point, which I hadn't thought of, is I guess what we're saying with if we choose to go down the route of making this its own API object, what we're saying is that it can't stand alone for most implementations, right? Like just installing FQDN and programming a bunch of rules will actually just not work for you.
For standalone resource, it will work because for standalone resources, you can define another semantics, right? Because you were saying for this FQDN, we are, for example, only talking about out of cluster things. So when you apply an egress rule with an FQDN, it doesn't really affect or lock down anything in cluster. It just locked down, for example, all of cluster accesses. Then we don't have this problem. But if you wanted to combine this with current network policy v1, for example, then you're met with this tricky little caveat that comes with implicit isolation. But if you have a whole different resource, then you can define whatever semantic you want. You can use another semantics to get around this. But I doubt it will be well received in SIG network because there's gonna be more implicit behaviors, I would say.
This has nothing to do with that there is an FQDN, right? If you put an IP block there, you're not gonna be able to go anywhere. I mean, you cannot look up your internal services. Is that what you're saying?
This is actually one of the decisions that I remember about being a discussion of this FQDN thing, right? So if it should be just like a way to block queries on core DNS and be like a plugin for core DNS, or if we really want to be on the middle of the data path. And I think that right now, again, it's for me, it's an implementation detail that we should take care. but also ask for the users on the user story, hey, what do you want? Do you just want to control like the DNS queries, or do you want to control the IP blocks that belongs to a DNS query, as an example?
Let's say that if I specify that I want to talk to a pod in the same cluster, and it's behind a service, right? I'm gonna do a DNS lookup.
But yeah, but
if
again,
if you say that any egress block blocks anything that's not there, then everyone that's going to specify any egress needs to say that.
But again,
service, right?
It's what I'm saying, right? Yeah. In both of case, you have core DNS and you have your data path. So this is an implementation. This is the implementation. But hold on. This is the implementation detail that I'm talking about. So right now, I think that we have caveats on both of them, but we should just hear from the users. Hey, actually from the cluster admins. Hey, what do you mean by an FQDN policy? You want to change the DNS query, or you want to change the data path, right? And over that, we can decide with how is the implementation going to be. So is this going to be just in kubedns or core DNS, and we need to talk with the owners of those services, and this is a graduation criteria? Or we should talk, as an example, to the CNI implementations and say that the graduation criteria is actually the data path intercepting those queries to block in layer 3, as an example, by the IP address. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a data point about that. So this is something that I know Gobind and maybe Andrew Sai Kim, I forget who else, they talked about this during the last iteration of FQDNs. And Gobind did a bit of reach out to customers, and I can ask him to share the data. I don't have the raw data on hand, but the upshot of that was that customers expected this to be a data path protection, not just a DNS protection. The thinking was that, okay, if I write an FQDN block, I also want to prevent against exfiltration scenarios where someone hard codes an IP. If you hard code an IP, I still want to be able to block that traffic with this FQDN specifier. And yeah, I mean, if it helps, I can say. Sorry, was that?
If the address happens to be what you get back from the DNS lookup, I assume it's okay then.
Right. Yeah.
You shouldn't have to do the DNS lookup in order to unlock the enforcement point.
That's something that that's another to-do item. Is I think it's reasonable to say that, yeah, if my IP is cached locally, I shouldn't have to do a DNS to look it up. But I think certain implementations, we'll have to talk to CNIs about if that's a reasonable thing to enforce, because that comes at odds with the star specifier, where, like, if you've cached something that I've selected with the star, then we're in a little bit of trouble, where I can't immediately resolve that IP as belonging to your wildcard matcher.
Yeah, and this can be in our CAP. Sorry for interrupting you. So
no, I was done.
This is something that can be part of the CAP. Okay, so you can put the caveats, you can put the limitations, you can say that this solves and this doesn't solve the problem. So right now, we don't know if this is going to be accepted. We need to map everything on that and just add. But again, trying to stick, in my opinion, with the implementation details over the CAP, right? Because then you can call, as an example, we don't have all of the CNI folks here. But as soon as you send that in SIG network, all of the CNI folks, they are going to jump in and say, hey, this is possible, this is not possible, this can be done, this cannot be done. And then we can get like a state of the world on the CAP, right? This is my...
I mean, we could describe an abstract model, right? I mean, if you intercept, you can still describe a model, right, that it comes from, that you have to intercept the DNS call and then check that against the filter and so on. I mean, I'm sure we can describe a model for it, at least an abstract model, not how it should be implemented, but to describe how the sort of what the expected outcome is. I mean, basically, does there have to be an active lookup if there is a star for it to match or not? And so on. Basically, how driven from the user side is it? But yeah, at least have a model that makes it possible to understand what to implement from.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question. I think Cal had the same question in SIG Network. So yeah, it's going to come up again.
So do you have like a main objective out of Thursday, Raul? You think, like, if you could get one question answered, what would you want it to be? We could possibly help steer the conversation there.
I think at the end of the day, if we can just get a determination on the way the winds are blowing, I'm hearing make this a new object. It simplifies, how we define it and the expected behavior. So if I can basically pitch, I guess, what is proposal 2 essentially in this case, which is building a brand new resource, and with some incorporating the lessons learned from the network status. If we create a brand new object with FQDN, does this broadly appeal to the SIG community? And I think if we can just get a yes, we're okay with creating a brand new object, we still need to define exactly its behavior and exactly whether CNIs can support this. But if I can broadly get a go ahead with further explorations on this, I think that's a good outcome on this, where everyone's aligned that okay, we're going to make a new object.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. That sounds like a good plan. And we can move forward from there. Thanks for taking this up. It's a lot of work. You're on the right path. Hopefully you learned from AMP and the mistakes that were made, so we can make it a little quicker.
Thank you guys for all your help and advice. This really is very helpful.
I'll promise I will not bring up the lookup on the meeting on Thursday. I did it last time, but I will not.
I will be on that meeting.
Yeah, I think there's enough.
And I will send messages to you and say, Kurt, stop. Just stop.
Defining the model and sort of come up with a number of reasonable interpretations of it, I'm all for that. So I might even defend it.
There you go. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Perfect. Thanks so much, Raul. The only other thing I had on the agenda today was just some wrap up stuff with ANP. There was kind of a little funny thing. I don't know if some of you might not have seen that. We had actually merged the ANP cap without it being marked as implementable. And so I had to file an exception, but it got passed and everything's good now. But it was just a funny little hiccup at the end of a very long road. So thanks for all the help there. The next thing for AMP is just finalizing there's 2 to-dos in the KEP still before we can actually start opening a PR to implement the API. And I was just going to ask here, like, what do we think is the best way of resolving those to-dos? Because these are both things. I have it in the agenda. One is the meaning of priority 0, of course. And the other is how to calculate the number of maximum rules in a single AMP. And I want to resolve these. Well, the 2 options are we resolve them before I start implementing the API, or I start implementing the API and we resolve them in that PR. I don't know if folks have opinions on one way or the other, but I don't really, to be honest. I'm going to take that as no one has any opinions on how to solve that one. I think the right thing to do is going to be getting maybe another small separate meeting with like the likes of Tim and the people who had objections to what we had originally, and see if we can come to some sort of conclusion. So if no one has any objections to that, I'll set something like that up.
Wait, so right now, as of now, the meaning of 0 was what?
Right now, it's still like what we wanted. It's if you look at the KEP, which I linked there. Let me pull it up. I have it in front of me. It just has a big to-do around it. Right now, it's basically that 0 is this special baseline priority. but there was some folks who, like KC from Red Hat, and I think the other KC as well, had some objections to it, and even Dan Winship. So it's something we need to hash out before we can fully finish everything. But those are the only two unresolved bits, so that's really good. And I want to make sure, I don't want this conversation to explode into trying to change other parts. Like, I want to keep it really narrow to these literally two unresolved things. So I just was asking for what y'all think is the best way to do that. But I think by now it's somewhat obvious. So yeah, congrats again to everyone who worked on this thing. And we'll just work to keep moving it forward. The last thing, I guess, you are here, Ricardo. Do you want to say anything else about the network policy status cap? Do you want to, clap your hands, get excited? I don't know. Yeah.
Yay! One more cap for me. Yay!
Another cap.
Yeah. So, yeah. So just to put everybody on the same page. So the status cap got merged. That cap was a recommendation, actually a requirement from the PRR and also team review to get endport and market as GA in a way that CNIs, they can provide an information on why a network policy was or wasn't merged, wasn't implemented, sorry. So I have started implementing that thing right now. I'm just bringing some persons from VMware, like doing some pair programming with some persons that wanted to start contributing with Kubernetes in that implementation, in that API implementation. And I expect by the end of this week, maybe to have at least, because that's a pretty easy cap one, right? That's just putting conditions in network policy status. So I plan by the end of this week to have at least the implementation of the API, the model, and maybe start adding some tests if they are required, and then poking SIG network approvers and API reviewers to say, hey, can this get merged, or hey, should we put this on a hold? I think that I wanted to bring to you folks, as we have some folks from CNI here, CNIs, is that the endport one, I sort of implemented the endport logics on some of the CNIs, right? So I did that on Calico, I did that on Kube Router, and I did that some sort of a POC, a proof of concept in Cilium, and there is a PR open for that, right? I did that on Antria, Abhishek and Young, they did that, and I did that on OpenShift one, right? So in the network policy status, there are some graduation criteria as well for the CNIs, but I won't be able to do this shepherding on the CNIs, on the other CNIs. So we do have the risk of getting stuck in alpha status or beta status if no CNI wants to implement that, right? So probably this is something that we should keep on track. And because this getting stuck, we'll get stuck also the port ranges, and this can get also direct impact on the FKDN one as well. If they put the status, if we decide to put the FKDN field on the network policy object instead of getting a different object, and this can be a risk for other things as well. So I hope that you don't get the same problem on the cluster network policy, and maybe after that getting merged, we can get started on network policy V2, which gets everything from every fields, everything that everybody wants, and everybody can be happy, and we can be a happy family, and that's all.
Cool, thanks. If everyone's happy, that will be a miracle, I think. But it's something
probably in Kubernetes 2.5. We can get
maybe we can have a beer in Spain, Valencia, the spring.
Yeah,
That's the starting point.
I hope so.
Totally.
So yeah, that's all.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm looking at this cap. I think it's you pretty much.
Congratulations to you folks for the admin network policy, because after 700 comments, it's not for everybody, and I would be really mad at that. So congratulations to you all.
It was a group effort for sure. And thankfully the AMP has status built in, and I was just double checking, looking at your network policy status cap, and it's basically the same thing. So that's good in terms of consistency across the APIs. Cool. And in terms of implementation, I know for one, I'll gladly implement status in Oven Kubernetes. It shouldn't be too hard at all, to be honest. So you can look forward to that at least.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. So is there anything else from anyone? Comments, questions, concerns? Going once, going twice. Sold? Okay, cool. Well, hey, thanks everyone for coming. I'll be in touch shortly. Rahul, if you need any help this week before like review, just reach out in the Slack channel, and I'm happy to take another round of look at the document and stuff. So
That sounds great. Thank you.
for sure. Okay. Have a good day, everyone. We'll talk to you. We'll see you on Thursday or the Monday after next. Have a good one.
Have a nice week,
Thanks.
folks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.